Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā katoa katoa. Hei hari koa tēnā ko, me te rongo atu, I tā koutou kaha, I roto I o koutou mahi. Hei painga mō ngā uri o Aotearoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. So, who is your new Minister of Conservation? Well, I'm a Jaffa. I grew up in Auckland, but I rolled south to the mainland, to Otatahi, Christchurch, and I stayed. In Auckland, I was lucky to grow up on a section where there was a gully, where we could climb trees, where we could muck around in the creek, dam it, and to go on holiday in the Rotorua Lakes, where we were free to roam, to paddle a dinghy in the lake, just to be out in nature. That experience has forged my commitment and passion for nature, and that is something I want every child in Aotearoa to have, access to wild nature. Kids need to be able to get out into nature and to be able to play. So, like all of you in the room, I am inspired by ensuring that we do our utmost to ensure that nature thrives in Aotearoa, because that is at the heart of the department's mandate in the legislation, in the Conservation Act, preservation and protection of our natural resources and our historic heritage as well. We need to ensure that our species thrive, and that is my number one priority. And it was reading the Threatened Species Strategy, the draft, and seeing that the department only had the ambition and the resources to manage 500 species for persistence and 150 for enhancement. That made me realise the funding gap. So that has been my priority with senior management, having those conversations with colleagues to make real that commitment in the confidence and supply agreement to significantly increase conservation funding. There's been an extraordinary amount of work done with programs like Battle for Our Birds, that landscape scale predator control, but we need to do much more if we're going to be more ambitious in terms of our threatened species. So no promises. Treasury is saying there is very little money in the cupboard, but we're working really hard to try and increase the baseline. And it is in that landscape scale predator control where I've been really inspired by the department's work. If you look back to Campbell Island, the eradication of feral cattle, sheep, and then in 2001, the largest rat eradication program in the world. The logistics, the organisation that it took to actually make that happen and to ensure that it's successful just shows that the department is at the cutting edge of predator control at that large scale. So that's where I think with additional resources we should be investing, taking that out across larger parts of Aotearoa. Because the skills are there, the organisational management, the logistics management is there. So I've got more faith in the continued development of those traditional techniques and being able to apply them to larger and larger areas than some of the gene editing that people are seeing, some people are seeing as a silver bullet. It's novel technology, it hasn't been tested, it doesn't have a social licence, it's yet to go through all of the regulatory measures. So I think we continue to focus on improving those traditional techniques, using new lures, using new baits, and looking at how we work with geographical features, doing what Zip has done in South Westland, and getting major success at that landscape scale. And it's also the partnership with other agencies, the regional councils, and the community. There is huge enthusiasm for this goal of predator-free 2050. A lot of those community projects want to achieve the goal as much as we do, but I have yet to see a clear strategy, action plan, and the targets and performance measures as to how we get to predator-free 2050. So that is a challenge. I know the department's working on it. We need to do more than just say we're going to get there. We need to have the plan in place to do that, in the same way that there was detailed planning done to actually achieve those successful island eradications, like on Campbell Island and with the $1 Million Mouse program. Can you carry the message back to staff who are involved in those landscape scale control efforts and the huge additional pressure that they are having to bear as in Taranaki with the threats being made to their safety? Thank you for putting yourself on the line. I had thought there had been wider public understanding and acceptance of the importance of 1080. In terms of other priorities, it's increasing the protection of land with conservation values. In the speech from the throne, there was a commitment to no new mines on conservation land. So it's developing the best policy mechanisms to do that. And I thank Mark Davies when I was on, where are you, Mark? On the coast recently. The first item of the day was having a meeting with departmental staff, and I thought it was a bit of a briefing on mining. We had about 12 to 15 statutory land managers, the staff doing the work on mining concessions. They peppered me with the questions that they were being asked. That was a really useful exercise to think about how do we best go about putting this policy in place of no new mines on conservation land, and how do we talk to people in the interim before we get the legislative or the policy change finalised. Increasing the protection of land, also stewardship land. Now, really value the recommendations of the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, but with 2.5 million hectares of stewardship land, I'm really aware of the huge workload reviewing the status of that is putting on the department. Conservation boards have identified some priorities for that. I think we should be doing something like was done with the Timberlands exercise, an independent committee of experts to provide advice. But one thing, I see stewardship land very differently from those who wrote the West Coast Regional Economic Development Report, and the department was involved in that. There, the review of stewardship land seemed to be about identifying surplus conservation land which could be disposed of and then used for more mining, more logging, more destruction of biodiversity values. Stewardship land is conservation land. The law requires that it's managed to preserve and protect its conservation and historic heritage resources. So it's not surplus to requirements, and I think the Ruataniwha decision has confirmed that. The statutory advocacy function that DOC has, it's a responsibility in the Act to advocate for nature. Over the last 9 years, that responsibility has been constrained. I've recently written to the Director General asking that an RMA advocacy strategy be developed and that work be reinvigorated. Because it's been my experience working for Forest and Bird and on the Regional Council, when the department uses its fantastic technical expertise, its scientists, its ecologists, its planners and its lawyers, and it puts in front of the RMA decision makers, the councils and the Environment Court, the information about biodiversity values, the species that will be affected by developments, that makes a real impact in terms of decisions under the RMA. So in the freshwater space in particular, where all of the debates are happening at regional councils on flow regimes, the department has a real role in ensuring that ecological values are represented in those fora, so that we get flow regimes that sustain the aquatic habitats, that sustain both native fish species, wildlife, and recreational values as well. So also just in that freshwater space, the fact that 74% of our native fish are at risk or threatened with extinction, a higher proportion than virtually anywhere else in the world, is deeply troubling. Whitebait, culturally recognised as one of New Zealand's favoured pastimes. But why is it illegal to sell trout, but whitebait, native fish, can be sold commercially? That makes no sense to me. I think we need a stakeholder working group there to engage with people and look at what are the changes in the season, what are the changes in the regulation, what are the enforcement mechanisms we need, and should there be a stop to commercial sale? I think there should, but it's how do we work to get acceptance for that. You will have seen in the confidence and supply agreement with Labour, there is a commitment to establishing the Kermadec Rangitahua Ocean Sanctuary and working alongside iwi to do that. The values of the Kermadecs are outstanding. Niwa, when it presented some underwater videos to the Select Committee, just those hydrothermal vents, the astonishing array of fish there, the marine mammals, and its really important cultural values as a stopping place on the way to Aotearoa. We need to get that sanctuary across the line, but there's quite a lot of quite subtle negotiation that's going to be required there. Taranaki, the blue whales, that work by oceanographers and others highlighted the importance of the Taranaki bite to marine mammals. We want, in the confidence and supply agreement, to look at the feasibility of establishing a marine mammal sanctuary there to protect the blue whales and those 33 species that use that area. But one of the other key issues in the marine space is bycatch, and the fact that thousands of seabirds, hundreds of fur seals and dozens of dolphins die each year in our commercial fisheries. We've had media coverage recently around the threat net set to hoiho, and I'll be going to Dunedin to talk with the Hoiho Yellow-Eyed Penguin Trust later this week. We need to be advocating even more to the new Ministry of Fisheries, which is evolving out of MPI, to ensure that those commitments in the Fisheries Act around sustainable fisheries, around ecosystem management, actually mean something. To make sure that the threat management plans are finalised, to get the industry to recognise that bycatch is a serious threat to a lot of our seabird species. DOC, I know, has done work in that space, but it needs to be ramped up with more capacity. Also, the issue of marine protected areas reform. That's shuttled backwards and forwards between the department and the Ministry for the Environment. The proposals that the last government put were only for marine protected areas out to the 12 nautical mile limit. Yet under the Convention on the Law of the Seas, we have got a responsibility to preserve and protect our exclusive economic zone. We've got the 4th largest EEZ in the world. Other nations will be saying, why aren't we following international examples in Niue, Palau, elsewhere, to actually have these deep sea marine protected areas? So that will be a major set of policy work, but it's one that is a priority. Then there's tourism. New Zealand has been lucky with a small population. We have had a lot of space. Nature in some areas is in fairly good condition. But this wave of visitors is, as you know, putting real pressures on place. And we've had a total failure of infrastructure planning around tourism. We don't even have a Ministry of Tourism to have been thinking about the policy. And that, I think, has put DOC in a de facto role of being the tourism provider of the infrastructure for visitors with huts, tracks, campsites and the like, and also having to think about how those visitors are dealt with. We need to do more thinking, more work about how we plan for these arrivals and whether the strategy of continuing to grow visitor numbers is a sensible one. Getting quality, not quantity, seems to me economically more valuable. So it's doing things like transport planning. How do we get visitors to places? How do we use our regional cities and towns as the nodes where people stay, where they eat, where they shop, and then they visit conservation areas during the day? They're not expecting to stay in big lodges and big hotels on the conservation estate, because that helps ensure that infrastructure is well developed in cities and towns where it benefits residents as well as tourists. Then I have left the treaty relationship till last, because to me it is also one of the key priorities and one of the most challenging areas for me as Minister and for the department. Very aware that the Conservation Act was one of the first pieces of legislation that enshrined that commitment to implementing the principles of Te Treaty. The department did very well in the late 80s in having kaupapa artawhai managers set up early working and engaging with runanga. Then, for various reasons, and I think the restructuring in 2012-13 didn't help, that relationship is in varying degrees of health around the motu. So how do we make that treaty relationship real? How is it that we work with legislation like the Reserves Act and the National Parks Act, which comes from a different era, and ensure that there is a systematic and coordinated and understandable process by which iwi and hapu are able to engage and to ensure that their values are seen as operating day to day on our conservation lands. So we can do much better there. How we ensure that customary rights are able to be exercised. I guess I've been a bit surprised to discover that the last significant policy debate on customary takes was actually back under the Conservation Authority in the mid-90s. So those issues need to be much more widely discussed, and I know it's a critical priority for management as well, but it's a really serious issue for me, and we're walking forward step by step by step. So can I just say in conclusion that this government recognises the enormous value of a strong public service. The work you do is critical not only because it is for the public, but it is for all of our Indigenous species and the places that they live. You are the front line of work in conservation. So I honour, respect and thank you for all of your personal commitment and the work that you do every day to help all of our wild places, all of our species thrive, and to enable New Zealanders and quite a few international visitors to enjoy those. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.